Hey there, friends, and welcome to this episode of SelfKind, a podcast for highly sensitive people. I'm your host and fellow highly sensitive person, Erica Webb, and I'm also a registered counsellor, somatic exercise coach, and yoga teacher. And today I thought we could talk a little bit about the ways that we learn to kind of armour up and protect ourselves as highly sensitive people. And I'm going to do that with the help of a little story. And this story sends us back quite a number of years to a time when I was commuting into the city centre in Melbourne, and I was taking the train and then walking down the road to attend an office job. Now, this might seem a little bit random, but this is ultimately the story of a bird. So I used to take the train into this particular underground train station in Melbourne, and then I would have to come up from underground and make a walk from that train station down to my office. And I did this every day for a bunch of years. And at some point, there became a real threat on that walk in the form of a tiny white and black bird. Now, I say it was tiny. It wasn't super tiny, but it wasn't a magpie. So often, here in Australia, when we hear swooping bird, we think magpie. And that's actually what got me thinking about this story, because we have entered swooping season here in Melbourne, and I am now on alert when I go for a walk. But anyway, it was not a magpie. It was another small white and black bird. And it decided to take up residence right outside the exit to the train station. And it decided that it would be a really great idea to target everybody going to work by swooping them on the back of the head. Now, this bird had many, many victims. I would watch every single morning as I walked down the road, and I would see it swoop into the back of people's heads repeatedly, just over and over again. It would pick one person and then they would move on and it would get another person. And you would see people, kind of scrambling down the road trying to avoid being swooped by this bird. And I had seen and knew about this bird for quite a bit of time before it actually got me. And I remember so vividly the feeling of its little claws getting into the back of my head. Thankfully, it didn't draw blood, but it did feel like somebody had kind of grabbed the back of my head with their long fingernails. And it was really unsettling. It was awful. I didn't like it at all. And the problem was, of course, that every day I had to make that same walk, because getting off at any other train station just was kind of, a bit ridiculous. It would have made my commute super, super long. And so I had this situation of having to get up out of that train station every day and make the walk down the road and hope that this bird wouldn't target me again. And it was a really good lesson in how quickly we learn how to protect ourselves from, things that are potentially threatening towards us. And so it was really interesting. You would walk down this street and you would see all the, office workers commuting very much on high alert, and people would cover their heads with things. So they would put their laptop bag over their head, or they would take their newspaper and put it over their head, or some people would kind of just wave a hand over their head to avoid the bird kind of getting in the way. People would really speed up their walking to get past that little stretch where the bird hung out. And you could sort of see people like really very much on high alert, looking around trying to spot the bird. And it was a very interesting experiment of sorts to see how that understanding of the threat that was present created change in people's behavior and in their sort of physicality. It changed the way that they held themselves and the way that they moved. And I think this is really interesting as an analogy of sorts for highly sensitive people when we think about the kinds of environments and interactions that might feel kind of threatening to us. Now, that's not to say that we are at risk of, physical harm or anything like that. This, the bird, of course, was swooping, and that's kind of the example. But sometimes it might be, the energetic challenges that we face as highly sensitive people who are deeply empathetic and kind of have a hard time not picking up on other people's emotions. It could be the onslaught of loud noises and bright lights and the way that we have to kind of modulate that as we navigate the world. It could be anything that sort of threatens to overstimulate our systems. And what I want to use this story for is to demonstrate how quickly, as a human, but particularly as a highly sensitive human, you learn how to armour and protect yourself from those incoming threats, and how in that process of armoring yourself, you end up with physical tension as part of that. And that is something that often highly sensitive people, complain about a lot. And I don't mean complain as in like, oh, but like it is a real concern for a lot of us highly sensitive people is chronic tension, pain, lots of tight shoulders, tight jaws, headaches, things like that. That's really common in the world of high sensitivity. And whilst the physical piece is very layered and definitely more complicated than this podcast episode will allow for, I just want to introduce this idea that our expectations in certain spaces alone can cause us to kind of armor up and put on, sort of almost elicit tension in the body to help protect ourselves. And so if that is the case, and it is, then we have to have practices and strategies for clearing that from the body, for allowing that tension to exit when it's no longer needed. The challenge, of course, is that as highly sensitive people, it can feel like it's needed a lot of the time, especially if we find ourselves in situations where there are tricky relationship dynamics or a lot of emotional load coming our way or a lot of overstimulating sensory input coming at us all the time. An example of that might be if you're a parent of young children, the sort of sensory reality of that can be a lot for a highly sensitive person. And so you might go through your whole day with like little toddlers around kind of feeling on edge the whole time, even though, doesn't say anything about how much you love them or anything like that. But it's just a reality that for some of us, navigating all of that input can be really difficult. And so it's important to recognize that part of the reason, and just part of it, right, because this is a complicated topic, but part of the reason why tension might be showing up in your body is for that very real reality that you're sort of trying to armor yourself to kind of help modulate what's coming in and to prepare and to sort of feel ready for whatever it is that's coming your way. But if we don't have the strategies to help support that after the fact, then we might risk constantly being in that state without any relief. And so that's where our practices like yoga and deep breathing and somatic exercise and meditation and even getting a massage and things like that can be so, so beneficial, because it puts us in a state, or it can put us in the right conditions for our body to say, oh, at least right now, I can let go of some of that armor. At least right now, I don't have to be on high alert or protection mode or worry about, how my boss is going to perceive my work or how my parent is going to, perceive my actions or whatever it might be. So we really need to be carving out those spaces for our body to have that opportunity for relief and release. And it's just, I don't know, I feel like there's a level of just responsibility on us to do those things. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It really doesn't. It doesn't have to take a long time. It doesn't have to be a whole thing. But if there is a way for you to find the practices and the strategies and the activities that support that, then, we want to be doing those things as often as we can to support the reality that a lot of the time as highly sensitive people, we're going to feel the need to be kind of armored up a little bit in the world. Now, like I said, there's so much more that could be spoken about in this within this topic. But really, I just wanted to use that story of the bird as, I think, a pretty poignant example of how quickly we learn as highly sensitive people to navigate our world and to navigate all of the things that come at us and to navigate, how we find a sense of grounded safety within that. Because I think that's an important thing to point out too, is that, when I was threatened by that bird and walking down the street on the way to my office, it was probably a really good thing that I was on high alert. It was probably a really good thing that I knew to speed up walking so that, I avoided it. It was probably a really good thing to be able to see, oh, yep, it's over there. I'm in the clear. it protected me from being the one that got swooped that day, at least to an extent, not completely. And so I think it's important to recognize that when our body kind of gives us those strategies through the body, right, that physical strategy of protection, that is very much in service of our well-being. It's very much in service of protecting us, of keeping us safe. The challenge can become, though, that it becomes very overgeneralized, and suddenly we're feeling like we have to protect ourselves all the time, which is often, not true. Sometimes it is, and that's a whole other story. But often it's not true that we have to have those defenses up all the time. And so then that's where we, need to dig in a little bit deeper and sort of think about what's going on there. But in very simple terms, our body uses those strategies in a very clever way, at least initially. And then sometimes they get overgeneralized and overused. But in those initial moments, and, even if you think about difficult relationships and things growing up and in our formative years, all of those strategies to keep us safe do their job. They keep us safe. And so then we want to be asking the question of, all right, once they've done their job, and sometimes that's in the immediate moment, and sometimes that's after realizing that we've been carrying a strategy for a number of years that we just don't need anymore. How do we create the conditions for our body to be able to let it go, right? And that let it go doesn't mean just like, just let everything go. But how do we create the conditions for our muscles to soften, for those defenses to drop, for the armour to come off, at least temporarily, so that we can have some reprieve, so that we can feel that sense of ease and fluidity and capacity within the body. So just a little bit of food for thought for you this week. I hope that story was a helpful illustration. And if you are looking for strategies to support that release, that environment that allows your body to soften, that allows your body to exhale, then you might really love it inside the SelfKind Hub. The SelfKind Hub is my online space for highly sensitive people, and a huge part of what we do there is focus on how do we create movement and the conditions for our bodies to soften those defenses, to soften that armour, so that we can have that relief and release of that full body exhale. So these are really gentle movements, gentle classes that incorporate somatic exercise and yoga, as well as mindfulness and breathing techniques, so that you set up the conditions internally for your body to be able to rest. And I think that these are vital skills for highly sensitive people. Lots of different ways to do it. Mine is just one of them. But if you are curious about joining us, I will pop some details in the show notes, and would love to see you in there. All right, that's it for me for this week. If you've got questions, if you have thoughts you'd like to share with me, you can absolutely come and find me. If you're already listening to this on YouTube, then you can just leave a comment in the comments on this episode. If you're listening anywhere else, you can come over and find me on Instagram, and you'll find me at ericawebb_selfkind. On my website, ericawebb.com.au, you'll find all the ways of working with me. And that's it. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.